for those who have been following us for the last 5 years, it's almost been 5 years, Dad. This man was one of the first guests we've ever had on this show. He was he was in the trucker convoy. He was taking his trip down to Ottawa. He was reporting back everything he was seeing. He's now been a very amazing advocate for rights and freedoms for the Canadian people. And he's back here on the show. His name's Chris Scott. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You weren't just in a truck, you were in a crane.
Yeah.
Was he in a crane?
Yeah. He was in a crane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Chris also owns the Whistle Stop Cafe, Mirror, Alberta. Chris, I saw you just recently speak at a conference, bearing witness that Jason Levine did in Red Deer. And as soon as I saw your speech, I was like, man, we got to have Chris back because I think it's easy to forget of what happened over the last 5 years and the cost. And so I wanted to take a few moments of your time for you to share, because we got new people hopping on Watch and Talk Truth for the very first time across the entire nation. You may not know who this gentleman is. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about you and how you got involved in the fight all the way back in COVID?
Sure. So yeah, my name's Christopher Scott. I'm from a little town in Alberta called Mirror, and I own a small diner, fuel station, RV park, and convenience store called the Whistle Stop Cafe. I bought the Whistle Stop Cafe in July of 2019, which was about 8 months prior to the COVID restrictions. Like most business owners and the majority of people, I spent all of 2020, the early 2020, concerned about what was going on in the world. My eyes quickly opened and I realized, what was really happening. By the end of 2020, I was really frustrated and I was broke. I had put everything into my business to try and keep it afloat. I was drowning in debt and I was up against the wall. So I decided that I was going to engage in some civil disobedience and try and get the government to pay attention to what was going on with businesses. So in January 2021, after a conversation with my staff and my family, I opened my restaurant against the restrictions, was quickly attended to by a number of AHS, Alberta Health Services inspectors, the RCMP, the Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis people, like you name it, OH&S, they came there and tried to shut me down. But I stood my ground to the point where I ended up in jail for holding a protest on my property. And the government actually seized my building. And, so I went through quite a few things, never backed down. And lo and behold, a friend of mine, Jeff Rath, him and another friend of mine, Leighton Gray, they actually were in court on another matter to do with the restrictions. As a matter of fact, it was the NDP and the Alberta Federation of Labor were suing the government to try and put masks back on children. Well, Jeff and Leighton were on the other side of that, and they exposed that our government had acted illegally, unlawfully, outside or ultra vires of the Public Health Act in implementing the restrictions. And we found that they were all illegal. So my stuff was dropped, but that's not before I ended up in jail. My business was seized and shut down for 8 weeks. They fined me $30,000. I had a compelled speech order in which I had to deliver the government's views on vaccines before I was allowed to give a speech in public. My mobility rights were stripped from me. I wasn't allowed to leave Alberta, and I had to do 200 hours of community service. Now, just as a point of comedy here, my community service was all done with the Alberta Prosperity Project, advocating for an independent Alberta. So that was, I love to find a way to make lemonade out of lemons, and that's what I did. So that's what happened. I became kind of infamous. The Whistle Stop Cafe became infamous, and it launched me into a life of advocacy that just has not stopped. During the time that I was open against restrictions, my place was flooded with thousands of people, many of whom shared their stories with me about how the government's actions were affecting their lives. And that was like a right in the heart, and it twisted. And, once you see those things and you hear them, you can't not do something about it. So I was put in a place where I felt I had a moral obligation to stand up for people who had no voice, because I, by accident, ended up with a voice and an audience. And I haven't stopped ever since. And now, now I'm 25 events into a 250 event tour of Alberta, advocating for an independent Alberta so we can reform everything.
Wow.
What was the difference in your mind between the province and the federal government over COVID?
Well, so the restrictions and mandates were largely provincial. Like the provinces have a jurisdiction over matters to do with health. However, the federal government deals with things like air travel, interprovincial travel, cross-border stuff, those types of things. They also have there's an organization called Health Canada. And you would assume that Health Canada's job is to advocate for the health of Canadians. That's just not true. My friend Sean Buckley, who I know you've had on your show as well, or I think you have, he's a lawyer, and he's been on the other side of the aisle in court matters with Health Canada. And he exposed that Health Canada's real mandate is to protect the intellectual property of pharmaceutical manufacturers, right? So we have these organizations that we thought were supposed to advocate for us. Now we find out, no, it's to advocate for those who want to impose or provide drugs to us. So there's a distinction between what the federal government and the provincial government do. But what happened with me is as I was going through these things, trying to find out who I was, what my rights were, what the law was, how courts work, all of those things which none of us know, I eventually peeled back the layers, and I realized that our Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms that I thought were there to make us free were not. They were actually, it was something that was imposed on us rather than something that we collectively decided that we were going to live under. And that opened up my eyes to the inequities between Western Canada and Eastern Canada, why things are the way they are. And one day it just occurred to me that the only way we're going to get out of this is if we flip the script, and instead of being governed by rules that were made by somebody else, some elite, some faraway land in England in this case, and imposed on us, we need to do it ourselves. So we make sure that our rights, freedoms, and liberties are foundational to our society, the way God intended.
Mm. Well, what I appreciate you about Chris, is, obviously we know the first guy through the wall gets bloody, and you were willing to take that on. But I think you just mentioned it. We learned a lot. The government and the global elites like to say the Great Reset. I like to say the Great Awakening. I think it woke up a lot of Canadians, and I think we realized kind of how the system works. Like you said, Health Canada, even because of the name, we think, oh, they're all for our health. They're not. They're drug pushers for the pharmaceutical companies. That's what they are. They're big old, mob bosses out there breaking legs if you don't do what they say. Because what you were saying in that conference is like bearing witness. It cost you a lot, but it actually made you stronger and not weaker. Is that the correct way of saying it? It kind of fired you up, right?
100%. And the cost, I paid a tuition. I paid a tuition to learn the most important lessons of my life to make me a better person and to move me from a place of political apathy, civil ignorance, those types of things, into someone who, I believe in sovereignty. I believe in individual liberty and individual choice. And if we're going to make choices and we're going to have liberties, we need to know who we are, what our place is, and what those choices mean. And I didn't know that before. But now, by paying that tuition, by going through those things, I've kind of graduated different levels or different schools throughout this thing. And it's equipped me better to change the world in the ways in which I want it to be changed. Before, I had no idea how to do any of this stuff. And now it's becoming more and more clear with everything that happens in this, the great tuition payment.
What happened in your case? Like you were saying, you got a bunch of fines and all that. Did a lot of that go away, or did it have teeth and all that had to be paid, and like they were serious about it?
Well, the consequences to what they did didn't go away. I mean, the biggest and most impactful consequence was that there were people that believed the narrative of the court. I had a judge, Justice Adam Germain, when he sentenced me and Pastor Art Pulowski, by the way, he said in his verbal his verbal explanation of his ruling that I had caused irreparable and immeasurable harm to the people of Alberta. Well, there was no evidence ever to suggest that. As a matter of fact, there was plenty of evidence to suggest that I did the opposite, that I prevented harm. But he said that. He said it publicly. The news said that. Premier Jason Kenney called me a scofflaw. He said that it was my fault that people were getting sick. And so the consequence to that was that people who are easily influenced by the media or authority, they view me like that. So it's cost me business. It's cost me, I've lost friends, right? Now I've gained a lot more than that, but those consequences were still there. Also, I started paying off those fines. I never got any of that money back. I never was compensated for the community service that I did, that I would have done for free anyway. I was never compensated for not being able to travel outside of the province. I was never compensated for being forced to speak the government's narrative. They just kind of said, well, due to the ruling in Ingram, that was the case, if you folks want to look it up, we no longer wish to pursue this, so we ask that you would stay this matter against Christopher Scott. And then it was all done, which was really annoying. I was fully prepared to go through that and very likely lose, like everybody else has been losing, right? Most people that fought the government in court were losing. I was prepared to do that because we were exposing what they were doing. Yeah. We subpoenaed, I don't know if that's the word. We got an order for AHS to give my lawyers all communication that had anything to do with me or the Whistle Stop Cafe. And what was in there was nothing short of shocking. Like they were emailing back and forth, saying things like, oh, I can't come to the Whistle Stop with you today because I have to attend to a COVID case in Sobeys and Lacombe. And then the response was, oh, can't you just say that was at the Whistle Stop so we can get this guy? In other emails, They were saying things like, we got to shut this guy down. We have to stop him. He's making us look bad. And this is all on record in that case. What's also on record is the health inspector that was attending the majority of the time was asked, was there ever a COVID case or any harm done by Chris at the Whistle Stop Cafe? No evidence of that at all. How many times did you attend his place? It was like, I don't know, many, many, many times. How many times did you attend other places? 0. So you targeted him. Well, not really, but you did target him because he only went there, even though there was nothing happening. So the things that came out would blow people's minds if this was in the mainstream media, but it never went that far. They just said, we're going to stay the charges. That's it. And, we live to fight another day and have to fight a different way. But I was disappointed that that's the way it went.
Yeah. So everything, by the way, I think God chose you to go through it. It's like anything in the Bible. It's always, he chose you to be the punching bag. But what's great about it is, like you said, you just took a course in how things work. Everything you know now, because you're a big component of speaking out for independent Alberta. What have you learned? What do we have to for Alberta to be successful, to get its to get that federal grip off of us? What do we have to do? What do we have to start building? What does that look like?
It starts with education. It starts with people realizing the position they're in and why, and how to get out of it. I believe Alberta, as a matter of fact, I believe any region or nation or province should be sovereign to the point where they can influence the legislation that governs them. Nobody should be governed in such a way that they can't affect the outcome. And Western Canada, we know for sure, especially considering that the last federal election was called at 8:09, and our ballot state polling stations closed at 8:00 here in Alberta. It was even worse in BC. We know that we can't affect those things. So it's one thing to live in a democracy and be unhappy with the way the laws are, because what you're supposed to do, you advocate for your position to change it, you bring more people than the other guy, and then you go to the polls and you win. Well, we can't do that. We have no opportunity to change that. We don't like that the CFIA can go in and slaughter 100,000 chickens if one of them sneezes. We can't change it. We don't have the voice or the power to do it. We don't like that the federal government will launder hundreds of millions fund programs with hundreds of millions of dollars with apps so that Canadians have the privilege of coming back to their country because there's a sickness going around. We can't change that. Western Canada can't change it. If you live in a situation like that, where you're unable to change the laws that govern you, as Western Canadians are, that is not democracy, that's tyranny, and nobody should have to live like that. If we could choose ourselves how we want to be governed, and it wasn't the way everyone wanted, whatever, that's one thing. At least we have the opportunity. Right now, we don't have that opportunity, and that needs to change.
Yeah, I know Allan has a big question for you.
Is there any group or people that you can think of that should be speaking up or help speaking up about this issue that are silent because of what might happen to them?
First Nations people. I wrote a blog a while back. It's at whistlestoptruckstop.ca/blog. It's called Why Independence Would Benefit First Nations People the Most. I wrote that when I started doing some research into the statistics that First Nations people live under in Canada. And the one that really tugged at my heartstrings was this. In Canada, in some of the worst cases, a man who lives on a reserve will live an average of 19 years less than a man living off reserve. Now, that statistic in itself should tell you that we need some major change, right? But what we're finding and what we're seeing is that the gatekeepers in those communities are using tactics similar to what tyrants have used all over the world, basically telling people, you need to support me and continue the status quo. Otherwise, you're not going to get food, right? And I find that, people are starting to speak up, but it's a very suppressed conversation.
Yeah.
My problem that I have is, the community that should understand the supremacy of God and the rule of law. To me, I've been a part of that over the last 50 years of being in the ministry and never really understood what the supremacy of God and the rule of law was. Consequently, when we now start to see our nation floundering and not even knowing who we were or who we are, began to, wake me up to realize that I got to get back to history and what was the foundation that Canada was built on. And it was built on the supremacy of God and the rule of law, meaning that Sir John A. Macdonald said that Canada is a Christian nation. And so much so that Psalm 72 verse 8 became the mantra verse, of the nation. He shall have dominion from sea to sea. And then in 1927, they built a peace tower and they put that in cement so that it would be a memorial stone so that the Canadians would never forget that. But then by 1982, we start changing things, and then we start seeing the Dominion of Canada change from Dominion Day to Canada Day. And I remember when that happened, Chris, and you probably do too, or maybe you don't, you're a little younger. But I know when that happened, and when that happened, it was like, oh, that's okay. We didn't know. We didn't have a clue that what that was doing was removing God from the supremacy of God and the rule of law in our nation.
When any nation has done that, it hasn't ended well for them. Right? The United States are celebrating their 250th year being the most successful experiment in freedom that the world has ever seen. And they did that because they based everything as being a Christian nation. As a matter of fact, the founding fathers of the United States said, I can't remember which one, he said, this only works with a moral Christian nation. Otherwise, it cannot work. And the reason for that, in my opinion, and same with Canada, is that we serve a God of distinction and of order. We serve a God who's given us free will, and that free will is supposed to be reflected in our actions towards others. So if someone doesn't agree with us, we're supposed to remember that not only do we have free will, but God's given them free will as well. And that is supposed to be, that's what should anchor our society and allow us to live in such a way where we can maintain freedom. When you start chipping away at that, when you remove that from society, you end up with little g gods coming in and claiming authority and even ownership over people. and telling them what they have to do, what they can do, what they can't do. There's no more free will involved. And you look to nations like, what Rome did before they fell. And, you some of these tyrannical nations, what they did. You look at what happened in the USSR in the, early 1900s. When they start to reject the principle of free will as God intended, the nation suffers. And we're starting to see that right now, especially in some of this legislation that's coming up. Like, yeah, we don't have free speech in Canada, but now our freedom of expression, our religion, thought, and expression is being threatened by Bill C-9, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that foundation is quickly crumbling, and we're seeing the symptoms arising in society for it.
Yeah. Chris, we got a couple minutes left. I want to ask you, I'm sure you hear it all the time. People ask us all the time, how can they get involved? Now that you're kind of like smarter because you've done the course of hard knocks, how do you see Albertans, Canadians getting more involved, that they start to see change happen in this country? Because we can't live it to the clowns, in the Parliament building anymore. They're just, we know the track that they're on. We know they want to destroy everything. They know they love that we're a culture of death, and they want to continue down that path. Fine. Free will, do what you will. How do you see Canadians gathering together, unified, working together to make a better Canada? How do you see they can get involved?
I don't see it working to unify Canada. I really don't. Canada it's a liberal country moving more towards socialism and government control. Period. That's what's happening. That's the way Canada seems to want to go. The West isn't so much like that. If you want to change these things, the very first thing you have to do is you have to look to yourself. Look at yourself. Have you taken the time to educate yourself on the facts? What Canada is, what the laws are, those types of things. Focus on building yourself up first. And then when you've done that, you can go and advocate for what you believe in. So I started an initiative called Let's Talk Alberta. I was sitting here one day and I was looking around at what was going on in Alberta. And I thought, I'm not going to be a victim to what anyone else is doing. If I want to do something, I'm going to do it. So I phoned a friend of mine. I said, we're going to do 200 events between April 15th and October 15th of this year. And he's like, okay. And he got started right away. And now that's ballooned into 300 events. So if people want to get involved in that way, go to the website, see where the events are, offer to help. Of course, we need help financially as well. Like I pay for everything myself and then cross my fingers and pray that when we do the event that the donation bucket fills up enough so I break even. But the idea with that is the education part, right? We're trying to bring this conversation to every corner of Alberta and talk to people who specifically, I'm hoping more people come that disagree and they'll tell me their disagreements and we can talk it out. That's how we do this. We just keep talking face to face, not keyboard warrior, face to face. Because when people stop talking, the people that disagree, bad things happen. And we've seen that. We don't want to see that anymore.
Yeah, agreed. Give out your website. How can people follow you? You said you had a blog as well. Where can they find that and learn more about the events?
Yeah, so my website is whistlestoptruckstop.ca. After you scroll through the piles of overpriced merch, you'll get to a blog section where I put some of my writing. I haven't written in a little while. Also, letstalkalberta.com. That is the website that has all our posters and stuff for where we're going to be. I would encourage everybody also to keep track of the Alberta Prosperity Project website. They have tons of great information there. And of course, the ultimate instruction manual for anything we want to do in our lives or anything that we want to change was written over a period of a couple thousand years by like 42 different people. It's called the Bible. You'll find a lot of really relevant things in there, some of which I just saw last night at Bible study. And that I guess comes back down to personal development and learning as much as you can.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you, and we're following along with what's happening. We'll definitely have you back, my friend. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.